Usually when you get a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of just absolute precision.
Right, like it's engineering or something.
Exactly. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at it, broken. The path forward is obvious. Put it in a cast, wait 6 weeks.
Yeah, it's a very clear-cut process.
But today we're looking at a diagnosis that society treated as an absolute ending. Well, one mother treated it as a starting line.
I love that framing.
So we are diving into the prologue and chapter 1 of Nagababu Janu's 2026 autobiography, The Unseen Path. And I really want to set the premise right out of the gate here for you, our listener, because this is not just some straightforward memoir about a boy born blind in 1980s India.
No, not at all.
We are using this story as a lens to understand how human beings map their world, how trauma rewrites our neural pathways and how identity is forged through sound, touch, and just the sheer willpower of the people who love us.
And that distinction is vital. Because to truly unpack the material in these early chapters, we're going to have to ask you to rethink your baseline definition of strength entirely.
Right.
We are heavily conditioned by movies and, well, history books to view strength as a visible, grand gesture, the heroic speech, the physical triumph over an enemy.
Yeah, the big cinematic moment.
Exactly. But what this narrative demonstrates is that real resilience is often totally invisible. It's about quiet, repetitive, almost mundane rhythms of endurance that build a foundation over decades.
Which is exactly why this grabbed me so much. You have a life that the immediate environment reflexively wrote off as a curse, but that narrative was completely hijacked and rewritten by a single silent vow made on an operating table.
It's incredible.
So let's just get into it. Paint a picture for me. Where are we when the story actually begins? Take us to the environment that produced that vow.
Okay, so we are in Vuyuru. Yeah. It's June 8th, 1986. Vuyuru is a small town in the state of Andhra Pradesh, India. And the way the text sets the scene, relying on the oral history passed down through the family, is incredibly heavy.
Heavy how?
Well, it's the peak of summer, and the temperature is oppressive, the kind of heat where the air itself just feels solid.
Oh, whoa.
The sun is beating down on the tiled roofs, and there is no breeze whatsoever. Even the wind, the author notes, refused to move.
Which is such a brilliant way to establish the atmosphere. It feels stagnant, like everything is just holding its breath.
Yeah, exactly.
And I can imagine in a pre-modernized rural Indian town in the mid-'80s, that heat is just inescapable. It permeates everything.
It dictates the rhythm of life. So outside the Pinamani nursing home where the birth is happening, there is this chaotic hum.
The typical street sounds.
Right. You have street vendors calling out, selling snacks and cool drinks to people seeking refuge from the sun. The outside world is moving forward completely unbothered.
But inside
the nursing home, the atmosphere shifts dramatically. Time essentially dilates.
The sensory contrast here is so sharp in the text. He describes the inside of the hospital smelling of Dettol, surgical spirit, and phenol.
Which is such a specific smell.
Oh, for sure. If you've ever been in an older hospital, that specific chemical cocktail of phenol and Dettol is instantly recognizable. It's like the smell of aggressive sanitation.
Yeah, that stinging clean smell.
And then you have the sound of these groaning ceiling fans overhead. They're just stirring this warm, heavy air around, offering no real relief.
And sitting on these uncomfortable wooden benches, waiting in this chemical-smelling heat, is the family.
Let's break down that family dynamic because they are the architectural pillars of this entire story, aren't they?
They absolutely are. So first you have the maternal grandfather, Gunatam. He's sitting with his head bowed, whispering mantras under his breath.
And he's a pretty respected guy in the town, right?
He is. We learned he is a man who never had formal schooling. He runs a small, cool drink shop. But within his community, he holds immense social capital because of his unshakable honesty.
Right.
So in high-stress, terrifying environments, people lean into ritual, and his ritual is the mantra.
Then you have the grandmother, Anasurya. Her ritual is a bit more vocal, a bit more desperate, I'd say.
Yes, very different energy.
She is softly chanting this Telugu plea, Swami Rakshan Shandi, meaning, Lord, protect them. It's a very specific kind of prayer. It's not a casual blessing. It's a plea you make when you know you are standing on the edge of a cliff and you have absolutely no control over whether you fall.
And that lack of control is the defining feature of the waiting room. Which brings us to the father, Ansharaya.
Right.
The text presents him as a deeply complex figure right from the start. He's a cycle mechanic. He has quick hands. He understands how machines work. And the author explicitly notes that he wasn't inherently evil or bad at heart.
But there's a big but there.
A huge one. He suffered from severe alcoholism. That addiction made him incredibly unpredictable. His presence in the family was usually a source of total chaos.
But the text makes a point to say that on this specific day, June 8, 1986, he is quiet. He is entirely sober.
Yeah.
He is just a man hoping for a healthy child.
Which makes the impending medical reality crash down so much harder. Because behind the doors of the operation theater, the mother, Venkateshwarama, is in a state of crisis.
The labor isn't going well.
No, it's agonizing and it is not progressing. Her physical strength is entirely depleted. The doctors make the call that a C-section is the only viable option to save both the mother and the baby.
And we have to remember the context. In 1986, in a rural nursing home, a C-section is a major, highly risky abdominal surgery.
Exactly. It's not the routine procedure we often think of today.
The tension in that room must have been suffocating. But finally, they hear it. The sharp, insistent sound of a baby's first cry.
And the grandmother outside actually gasps.
Yeah, she says, "Babu Vachadu, our boy is here." It's the universal release valve of tension in a maternity ward.
But inside that surgical room, the relief evaporates almost instantly.
Because the doctor starts the examination.
Right. The doctor begins the standard neonatal examination, and part of that involves checking the cranial nerves and the basic neurological reflexes. He takes a small flashlight, a torch, and waves it directly in front of the newborn's eyes.
Let's pause on the mechanics of that for a second. What exactly is the doctor looking for when they do that flashlight test?
So they're looking for the pupillary light reflex. When a bright light hits the retina, the optic nerve, which is cranial nerve 2, should instantly send a signal to the brainstem.
Okay.
The brainstem then sends a signal back through the oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve 3, telling the pupil to constrict to protect the eye from the light. It's an involuntary automatic loop.
So it should happen without the baby even thinking about it.
Exactly. If you wave a light and the pupils don't react, or the baby doesn't flinch or track the movement, it indicates a fundamental disconnect in that neural pathway.
Yeah.
The hardware might be there, like the physical eye, but the wiring to the brain just isn't transmitting.
And Nagababu writes, based on what his mother told him, that the doctor tries it once. Nothing.
Yeah.
He tries it again. No response. And a quiet understanding just washes over the doctor's face. He steps out of the theater, the weight of the world in his posture, and delivers the verdict to the father.
Just 4 words.
Your son is blind.
Think about the finality of that statement in that specific era and location. There is no internet to research second opinions.
Right.
There are no specialized early intervention programs in rural Andhra Pradesh. A medical diagnosis like that is delivered as an absolute, immutable verdict of fate.
It's just a wall.
Yes. The father completely freezes. The grandparents stop their prayers. The entire world just grinds to a halt.
I want to look at how we conceptualize birth for a second, because culturally we view birth as this ultimate blank slate.
Oh, absolutely.
The infinite possibilities. It's a brand new, pristine notebook. But what happens here is that before this child has even taken his first real breaths of outside air, society snatches that notebook out of his hands and starts scribbling its own harsh, predetermined assumptions all over the pages.
Wow, that is a great analogy. And what you're describing is actually the core concept of the social model of disability.
Break that down for me, because I think we usually look at disability purely through a medical lens.
Exactly, and that's the traditional medical model.
Oh.
Says the problem is the individual's physical body. The body's broken, therefore the person is disabled.
Right, it puts the onus on the individual.
Exactly, but the social model of disability flips that entirely. It argues that a person might have an impairment, in this case, a biological lack of sight.
Okay.
But the disability is actually caused by the way society is organized. It's the society that builds a world exclusively for sighted people, that refuses to provide accessible tools, and most importantly, that attaches deep social stigma to the impairment. So the blindness is a biological fact, but the disability is social.
Precisely. The medical verdict of he cannot see is just biology. The societal verdict of his life is over is a human construct.
And we see that societal verdict materialize instantly in the hospital corridor. The medical diagnosis froze the family, but the whispers from the extended relatives ignited the real conflict.
It happens so fast.
It really does. The text gives us the exact words that were floating through that hallway. They're saying, a blind child, what life will he ever have? And then the most devastating line.
Yeah.
He will end up begging. Someone even calls it a curse on the family.
You have to understand why they immediately jump to begging, though.
Yeah.
It's harsh, but in that socioeconomic context, without government safety nets or inclusive education systems, the marginalized often were forced into the streets.
It was a visible reality.
It was. Beggar syndicates were a real and visible part of the landscape.
Uh-huh.
For the relatives, they aren't just being intentionally cruel, they are stating what they believe is a statistical inevitability. They are looking at this newborn and projecting a lifetime of destitution onto him.
He will end up begging. The weight of that sentence is crushing. And the mother, Venkateshwarama, is lying on the operating table. She has just undergone major abdominal surgery.
She's completely vulnerable.
She is pale, she's shaking from the blood loss and the anesthesia fading, completely exhausted. But the walls are thin, and she hears every single word of those whispers.
Let's look at the psychology of her reaction here, because it is the pivot point of the entire book.
Yeah, it changes everything.
When a human being is subjected to immense physical trauma compounded by sudden psychological shock, the standard nervous system responses are fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Okay.
She is physically incapable of flight. She can't get up and run. She can't fight them physically. So the relatives expect her to freeze or fawn, to accept the tragedy, to mourn the curse.
But she doesn't. She chooses to fight internally. She makes a vow right there on the operating table. A fierce, silent, completely unshakable vow.
And we should quote it.
Yes, she tells herself, "My son will not beg. He will not live in shame. Even if I must stand against the world, I will make him walk with dignity."
That moment is a masterclass in radical cognitive reframing.
How so?
She couldn't change the biological input. The blindness was a reality she had to accept. But she violently rejected the societal output. She walled off the shame. She didn't say, "My son will magically be able to see." That would be toxic positivity or denial.
Right. She didn't deny the reality.
Exactly. She grounded her vow in agency. He will walk with dignity.
Nagababu actually calls this vow the invisible shield. He says it was the first gift she ever gave him, and he carried it his entire life. It protected him from internalizing the belief that he was broken.
It's a profound concept to internalize for anyone listening. We all have external voices that try to dictate our limitations.
Absolutely.
Maybe it has nothing to do with physical ability. Maybe society looks at your background, your education level, your gender, or your socioeconomic status, and tries to hand you a script of what you can achieve.
A predetermined narrative.
Right. The question is, do you accept that script? Or do you have the capacity to make an internal vow that protects your own dignity when the world tries to write you off?
It's powerful. Really powerful. But, making a vow in the sterile, adrenaline-filled air of a hospital is one thing.
Yeah. Living it is another.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Executing that vow in a mud-floored house with no money is an entirely different reality, because eventually they have to take this baby home. They have to live in a world built for eyes using a brain that has no access to them.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of how a child maps an unseen world. The narrative transitions to his early childhood, living with his maternal grandparents in Vuyuru. And the sensory architecture of this environment is rich and complex.
So let's step into this house. It's the late 1980s. The floor is made of mud. It's kept cool because they sweep it and sprinkle it with water every day.
A very traditional setup.
Yeah, electricity is a luxury. The power grid is unreliable, so the lights come and go all the time. But for Nagababu, the lack of electricity doesn't plunge his world into darkness, because his world isn't built on light anyway.
Right.
His universe is constructed entirely through non-visual data.
And what we are observing in the text here is the phenomenon of neuroplasticity, specifically cross-modal plasticity.
Break that down for us.
Sure. When a child is born blind, the visual cortex, the occipital lobe at the back of the brain, which usually processes sight, it doesn't just sit dormant.
It doesn't just shut down.
No. The brain is incredibly efficient. It reroutes that massive processing power to the auditory and tactile systems. Nagababu's brain was quite literally rewiring itself to process smells, sounds, and touch with the kind of high-definition resolution that sighted people use for vision.
That makes so much sense when you read his descriptions. He doesn't tell us what color the walls are. He tells us that the mornings carried their own specific music.
It's a beautiful way to describe it.
He maps the layout of the house through the smell of tamarind rice and firewood smoke curling out from the kitchen. He knows it's time to wake up, not because sunlight hits his face, but because he hears the soft humming of his mother, the clucking of chickens outside, and the clear, steady sound of the dawn temple bell ringing across the town.
He is reading the room through shifts in air pressure and subtle auditory cues. The text mentions how, when the power failed, there was a sudden stillness in the air.
Right.
The hum of the fan stopped. He could hear the faint rustle of kerosene lamps being lit, and he noted that the room felt gentler, as if sound itself had lowered its voice.
It's like he developed this highly advanced emotional sonar. Think about a submarine navigating the deep ocean. It can't see anything, so it sends out a ping.
Exactly.
The sound wave hits an object, bounces back, and the submarine's computer calculates the distance, the shape, the density. Nagababu is doing that organically. Every scent, every sound is a ping bouncing back to his brain, telling him where the walls are, where the people are, and most importantly, where it is safe.
The submarine analogy is highly accurate, and his grandparents were the primary acoustic and olfactory markers of safe harbors in that navigation system.
Yeah, let's talk about the grandmother.
His grandmother, Anasuria Sari, smelled faintly of soap and turmeric. When he smelled that specific combination, he knew he was in a safe zone.
Wow.
He would sit by her and listen to her tell these elaborate stories of gods and demons. Her voice had this steady, lilting quality that completely grounded him.
And the grandfather, Gurunadham, provides a different kind of anchor. He's a man of very few words, but his voice is described as being calm and firm, like a drumbeat.
The linguistic choices the grandfather makes are absolutely fascinating. We have these direct quotes that became foundational to Nagababu's psyche. He would tell the boy, never think about what you don't have. Think about what you can do with what you have.
I love that. And there's another one. When Nagababu would shrink back, maybe feeling overwhelmed or hesitating to engage with the world, his grandfather would physically put a heavy hand on his shoulder and say, "The world listens only to those who speak through their actions."
Notice the phrasing there. The world listens.
Right.
The grandfather didn't say the world watches. He intuitively translated his wisdom into the sensory language his grandson understood. He is shaping the boy's worldview using auditory metaphors.
That is so perceptive of him.
And beyond the words, it was the tactile data. The text describes the grandfather holding his hand firmly while walking through crowded markets. For a blind child, the firmness of a grip is pure data.
It's a signal.
It communicates, I have you, I am guiding you, you are secure. Nagababu writes that with his grandfather he felt seen, not pitied for his deficit, but recognized for his potential.
So we have this incredible sonar system mapped out. He knows where the safe harbors are, the smell of turmeric, the drumbeat voice. But if you have an advanced sonar system designed to detect safety, it is equally calibrated to detect threats.
Unavoidably.
And the home wasn't just a sanctuary, it was also a battleground.
This is where we have to reintroduce the shadow of the father, Nancharaya.
Right. And as you mentioned earlier, the text is very careful. It doesn't paint him as a cartoon villain. It acknowledges he had skills, that poverty and addiction warped him.
Right, it's nuanced.
But understanding that context doesn't mitigate the terror of his actions. When he drank, the instability he brought into that house was absolute.
And we experience that terror entirely through Nagababu's auditory perspective. If the morning temple bell and the mother's humming were the sounds of safety, the father's return was the auditory cue of a coming storm.
The contrast is horrifying. Nagababu describes listening for the first sign of trouble, the uneven thud of his father's footsteps approaching the door.
Stop and analyze that specific detail for a second. The uneven thud? For a child relying on sound to predict his environment, rhythm is safety. A steady footstep means a sober, predictable adult. An irregular, stumbling, or rhythmic footstep is the ultimate neurobiological signal of danger.
His brain just goes into red alert.
Exactly. His amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, would immediately spike his adrenaline just from the cadence of the walk.
The sensory escalation of the violence is so hard to read. The uneven footsteps, then the door slams, vessels clatter in the kitchen as he stumbles around, his voice rises, slurred and angry.
It's a build-up.
And then the climax of the storm, the sharp, unmistakable sound of a hand striking his mother's cheek, her muffled cry, and the chaotic crash of glass bangles shattering and scattering across the hard mud floor.
It's devastating.
Nagababu describes himself as a little boy, crouching in a dark corner, pressing his hands hard over his ears just to block it out.
It is profound auditory trauma. And the psychological impact of this reaches its absolute peak in the incident with the cycle tire.
Oh man, this story broke my heart. Because Nagababu, living in this deep poverty, didn't have a chest full of toys.
No.
But he had found an old, discarded cycle tire, and he would take a wooden stick and roll this tire down the uneven streets. He absolutely loved the clattering sound it made as it bounced over the stones. It was his greatest delight. That clatter was the sound of pure, unadulterated childhood joy.
It was an acoustic plaything and allowed him to interact with the physical world, to control an object and track its movement through sound. But one afternoon, the text tells us, he left that tire sitting by the front door.
His father comes home, heavily intoxicated and raged about something, and he grabs the closest thing to him to use as a weapon against his wife.
Yeah.
He grabs the cycle tire, and he uses it to beat Nagababu's mother.
What happens here neurologically is a tragic example of auditory classical conditioning.
Like Pavlov's dogs.
It is similar to Pavlov's dogs, but instead of pairing a bell with food to create salivation, the brain is pairing a previously joyful stimulus with extreme violence to create terror.
Right. The sound of that tire hitting the ground was his favorite thing in the world. But suddenly, he hears that exact same rubber slapping sound mixed with his mother's screams. In an instant, the neural pathway is completely rewritten. The sound of his toy is weaponized.
The amygdala links the acoustic signature of the tire to the trauma of the assault. The text notes that Nagababu abandoned the tire that very day.
He never touched it again.
Never. He never played with it again. He writes that he left a piece of his childhood behind with it. It perfectly illustrates how poverty and domestic violence don't just inflict physical pain, they rob children of their mechanisms for joy.
But the narrative doesn't end in the corner with his hands over his ears, because the very next morning, the sun comes up. And this is where we see the concept of radical endurance take physical form.
We shift from the chaotic noise of the father to the defining acoustic symbol of the mother.
The mother, Venkateshwarama, would wake up as if nothing had happened the night before. She would go to the kitchen, and then the house would fill with the most important sound in this entire deep dive.
The heartbeat of the house.
The steady, rhythmic, mechanical click-clack of her sewing machine.
She was taking on piecework, sewing cloth bags for pennies to ensure there was money for food when the father drank his wages away.
Her fingers are aching, she has barely slept, her face is likely bruised, but she sits there and that machine goes click-clack, click-clack.
And what does Nagababu do?
Nagababu would crawl out of his corner, sit right beside her on the floor, and just trace the rough fabric as it fed through the needle. He listened to the rattle of the machine. He describes it as the heartbeat of the house, steady, unbroken, relentless.
The juxtaposition of these two dominant sounds is extraordinary.
It really is.
The father's noise, the stumbling, the shouting, the breaking glass is pure chaos. It destroys. But the mother's sound, the sewing machine, is rhythmic. It is productive. It creates.
So it's an education for him.
Entirely. For a blind child analyzing the world through audio, he is learning a fundamental philosophical lesson. Destruction is loud and unpredictable, but true strength is a steady rhythm that simply refuses to stop.
But I want to challenge this dynamic for a second.
Okay.
Because a modern listener might hear this and think, why didn't she leave? Is her silent endurance of this physical abuse, taking the blows, never shouting back, just getting up the next morning to sew, is that a tragic submission to patriarchy and poverty, or is it something else?
It is a vital question, and it requires us to look at the sociology of her environment.
Right.
In 1980s rural India, a woman leaving her husband, especially with a disabled child, faced near insurmountable systemic barriers. There was intense social stigma, zero financial infrastructure for single mothers, and the very real threat of starvation.
So there was no safety net to catch her.
None. Her options were not between a bad marriage and a peaceful, independent life. Her options were between enduring the abuse or absolute destitution for her son.
So within that trap, her reaction is actually highly calculated.
Exactly. It is a radical act of agency within a system designed to strip her of any power. She absorbs the violence so that it doesn't shatter the structural integrity of the family. By refusing to let the chaos stop the rhythm of the household, by getting up and running that sewing machine, she is actively enforcing the vow she made in the hospital. She is saying, you can bring chaos into the night, but in the morning I will continue building the foundation for my son's dignity.
Her will stitched into every seam. That's the exact phrase Nagababu uses. Every time that needle punched through the fabric, she was reinforcing that invisible shield. It was his masterclass in what resilience actually sounds like.
And we see that her fierce dedication wasn't just about passive endurance. She was also highly proactive. Which brings us to the family's exhaustive search for a medical miracle. They did not just accept the blindness without a fight.
No, they chased every single sliver of hope. They saved up what little money they had and traveled to see a highly renowned ophthalmologist of the time, Dr. Shiva Reddy.
And it was a big deal to go see him.
Huge. He does a thorough examination. But the biology is unforgiving. He confirms the initial diagnosis. The optic pathways are non-functional. Nothing can be surgically or medically done.
When medical science reaches its limit, human desperation naturally turns to the spiritual.
As it often does.
And so, when Nagababu is about 5 years old, the family hears of a mystic Swamiji in another town who is rumored to possess miraculous healing powers.
And this journey to the Swamiji is a huge milestone in the book, not because of the destination, but because it is Nagababu's very first train ride. And again, his sensory translation of this massive machine is incredible.
Tell us about it.
He doesn't see the size of the locomotive. He feels the immense rhythmic vibration of the tracks vibrating up through his feet. He smells the sharp scent of hot metal, burning coal, and steam.
Those heavy industrial smells.
Yeah. And amidst all this overpowering sensory data, the thing that grounds him is his mother's incredibly anxious, tight grip on his hand.
It's a beautifully documented moment of sensory overload managed by a tactile anchor. But unfortunately, the spiritual intervention yields the exact same result as the medical one. The Swamiji performs his rituals, but the boy's vision remains dark. They travel back home with heavy hearts. However, the text makes a crucial point. The parents had no regrets about these failed trips.
Right, because for them, the effort itself was the point. They needed to know they had turned over every single stone. They were fighting for his sight before he was old enough to know how to fight for himself.
It's also at this point in the narrative that the text briefly touches upon the biological root cause of the blindness, which they eventually discover was genetic.
Yeah, we have to talk about the genetics here. The author explains that the blindness was a recessive trait woven deep into the mother's bloodline, brought to the surface by the cultural practice of consanguineous marriage, specifically marrying within the extended family, like cousins.
You should explain the mechanics of that because it's a significant sociological and biological intersection.
Please do.
In many traditional agrarian societies, including parts of South India, marrying within the family was a common socioeconomic strategy. It kept land, wealth, and social trust consolidated within a known kinship group.
So socially, it made a lot of sense for them.
It did, but biologically, it's a roll of the dice.
Very dangerous role.
A very dangerous role.
Okay.
We all carry recessive genetic mutations that do no harm because we have a healthy dominant gene from our other parent to override it.
Right, the backup gene.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when two people share a recent common ancestor, the statistical probability that they both carry the same rare recessive mutation skyrockets.
I see.
If both parents pass that exact mutated gene to the child, the trait manifests. It's an autosomal recessive condition. The parents had no way of knowing this invisible genetic time bomb was sitting in their shared DNA.
It's a heavy realization. It means the blindness wasn't a curse from the gods. It wasn't bad karma. It was just the cold math of genetics.
Right.
But what I find so deeply uplifting about this chapter is that while the adults are exhausting themselves trying to fix his eyes, the 5-year-old Nagababu is already busy fixing his reality.
He's moving forward.
He isn't waiting for the Swamiji or the doctor to give him light. He starts manufacturing his own joy.
His makeshift toys are a testament to human adaptability.
They really are. He takes 2 empty matchboxes, pokes a hole in them, runs a string between them, and creates his own telephone. He's exploring sound transmission on his own.
Using whatever is around him.
Yeah, but the detail that really stuck with me is the mirror.
The pocket mirror.
Yes.
In his very early years, before the blindness became absolute, he still had a tiny sliver of light perception. He couldn't see shapes, but he could detect shifts in brightness.
So he takes this small mirror, and he sits on the mud floor where a beam of sunlight is coming through the doorway. And he spends hours just tilting the mirror in his hands, catching the sunlight and bouncing it onto the wall.
That's amazing.
He couldn't see the wall, but he could perceive this faint, dancing glow of light moving back and forth. He was entirely captivated by it.
Think about the psychology of that play. He has almost zero resources. He has an abusive father, deep poverty, and failing biology. Yet he uses a piece of glass to literally capture the sun and make it dance for his own amusement.
It is the ultimate metaphor for his life. And for you listening, I think this is where the story stops being a biography and starts being a mirror for our own lives.
How so?
How often do we paralyze ourselves waiting for the optimal conditions? We tell ourselves, I'll be happy when I get that promotion, or I'll start that project when I have the perfect equipment, or I can't move forward because my childhood was flawed. We wait for the light to be perfect.
But true imagination and radical resilience doesn't require optimal conditions. It blooms when you take the absolute bare minimum. A discarded matchbox, a fading patch of light, a single vow in a hospital room, and you forcefully invent meaning out of it.
If we pull all the threads together from this prologue and first chapter, Nagababu Janu's early life definitively proves that our reality is not constructed by what we can see.
Well, that's not.
It is entirely constructed by what we choose to listen to.
The architecture of his unseen path is built on the choices made in those early years. He could have internalized the whispers of the relatives predicting a life of begging.
He could have.
He could have allowed the chaotic terror of his father's footsteps to become his baseline expectation of the world.
But he didn't. He tuned his emotional sonar to the scent of turmeric, to the steady drumbeat of his grandfather's wisdom, and above all, to the relentless click-clack of his mother's sewing machine.
Those were the anchors.
Those were the sounds that forged the armor he would need for the massive battles waiting for him in the rest of his life.
It forces us to acknowledge that the environments we build for children, the sounds and the stability we provide, literally wire their brains for either despair or dignity.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, I want to leave you, our listener, with a specific lingering question to ponder as you navigate the rest of your day.
Think about your own daily life.
The commute, the office, your home. What are the sewing machine sounds in your world? What are the quiet, repetitive, almost mundane rhythms of resilience that are actually the heartbeat keeping you moving forward?
The ones you've perhaps stopped hearing entirely.
Or stopped appreciating because you've been too focused on the chaotic noise of the storms outside.
Identify those rhythms and protect them, because they are the foundation of your own invisible shield.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narrative, keep listening for the rhythm, and we'll catch you next time.